Welcome to our podcast. This is Hussain, Haider, Zaidi. I'm excited to be joined by a very special guest, Awais Imran, who is highly experienced product designer and design community leader. Awais has worked with multiple organizations and companies across different countries, bringing a wealth of a diverse experience to the table. In addition, he is a co-founder as Price OA and he is actively involved in design community in Pakistan. Today, Awais is sharing his experience and insights with us with a wide range of topics, including how product design can help the startups and helping the people who are pursuing their career into the product design. So let's start. Hello, Wes. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
Wes, let's start our podcast. Can you tell us a little more about yourself? What degree you chosen? How you been to the product design side?
Yes, so I think a quick introduction might be I'm as you mentioned, I'm a product designer. I'm until very recently used to work at Motive, which is a fleet management. It's a company that makes software and hardware for fleet management companies. I was a senior product designer there. Before that, I co-founded Priceway. I left 2 years into our journey there, but I was there at the start. And then before that, I worked for multiple different clients across Pakistan in freelance as well as some, for full-time, part-time capacity. And in addition to that, I'm very passionate about the design community in Pakistan. So I've been very involved there. I started the UX Design in Pakistan group, and now it's being run primarily by Arsalan and team. But I'm still stick around, still hang around every now and then, just helping out where I can. And I'm currently, I recently quit Motive to take a year-long sabbatical where I'll be working on side projects and like recovering from burnout, potentially pursuing, self-employment. That's I guess that's a reasonable quick introduction to who I am.
So, Wes, what kind of degree you chosen in your academia?
Yes, so I actually did study software engineering in my bachelor's degree, but about a year or maybe a year and a half into it, I realized while I do generally like the field of software, I don't quite like the implementation of it. It just felt a little too close to the implementation. So I luckily discovered, human computer interaction or software design, product design, UX design, whatever you want to call it, and then realized that, okay, this is actually what I want to do in life. At the time anyway, that's what I thought. So yeah, that's how I got into product design.
So it's a gut feeling for as a designer. You feel that I'm a designer, so I want to switch this thing towards design side.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's why I think I wanted to be involved in software, but not as close to the implementation level. I think one abstract layer above, that's where design, comes in, was the right balance for me. And if you go one step up, you in the abstraction layer, you get like a product manager, let's say. But I think I'm happy with the current balance for now.
Nice. So, Wes, if we talk about your design community, so what inspired you to become a design community leader in Pakistan, and how you tackle out these things to make a design community?
Yes, I think when I started UXDP, honestly the primary motivation for it was I was very much a junior designer. I was curious about design, hadn't really properly worked in the field, and so I thought, I'd maybe post around different groups at the time on Facebook. I think there was it's still there. This group called Pakistan Startups. I would used to post about design there, but we wouldn't really get any sort of like meaningful discussions happening. So I thought, hey, why don't I try my own group and see if I can, gather a few designers so we can have some, informal, but still productive, useful discussions and chats. And then that was the main impetus for it. That's kind of how it started. And as I started working on it, like I obviously met a lot of different people from different, like I met a lot of Pakistanis who were in America, in Europe, in the Far East, and working in Thailand or Singapore, and that really opened up a lot of just like it gave me a lot of exposure, and I really started enjoying the process. And so UXDP kind of just like took off from there. I was just really enjoying running the community, meeting new people. And it was a kind of a way for me to like really speed up my own learning process, my own growth, and like that's basically how UXDP started. And I think regarding the whole community, like how do you like any challenges and whatnot. I honestly was just like running it by like I kept thinking, if I were on the other side of this, if I were a community member, like what kind of content would I want to read that would get people to join the conversation. So I just like planned accordingly, and we could potentially, it's like a whole another like rabbit hole. We could spend like an hour on this as well, but I think that's like the gist of it. There's probably more content. Like if you're curious, you can look at it on. I think it's probably in the pinned comment on pinned post on UXTP if you want to look at our community values, do's and don'ts, and whatnot.
Yeah, I'm the part of this, and I have learned a lot of things from this. There's a PDF attached with this group, and a lot of things. A lot of people was just publishing their portfolios for junior designers as well. So, Awais, if we talk about like you are aligned with the design leaders and the design industry people in the Pakistan as well. So, what are the biggest challenges are facing in the design industry if we talk about Pakistan specifically?
So I think I actually did write about this maybe a few months ago. I think the primary problem facing Pakistani designers is just the lack of exposure. I think we essentially we just like if any junior designer wants to like jump into design, what they'll do is, they'll say, oh, you know what, maybe I should just learn how Figma works or like how Photoshop works. Where instead they should especially in the early days, they should be, I think, reading lots of books, like taking online courses, looking at other designers, like really accomplished designers, see what their work is like, and then really try to deconstruct, like, if it's a popular designer, why is that designer popular? Why is their work considered good? Like really drill down into maybe their design decisions, from like the visuals to the interaction, to how they design the entire product. I think developing a taste, developing like strong global exposure through the internet and whatnot, I think that is what sort of keeps not having that is what keeps Pakistani designers held back. And I think a part of that also includes just a lot of soft skills, like being able to communicate, well, knowing how to collaborate in a multicultural sort of environment, just like the basics of professionalism, showing up on time, do's and don'ts, so like what's appropriate in any professional or any kind of setting, stuff like that. I think kind of holds people back, because generally, like, people work really hard. They know they like jump into learning different tools, but I think they forget this aspect, which I think if they focus on that, it will just like unlock a lot of growth for them in their career.
Nice, right. So, Awais, there's a question, there's a misconception in Pakistan, like, what is the difference between graphic designer and a product designer? Maybe we can say UI UX designer. So it's a very basic question, but I want to know from the professionals what they say about this.
Yeah, so I mean, I think these are adjacent fields, graphic design and UI UX product design, however you want to call it. I think generally speaking, anyone who's a graphic designer can pretty much very easily transfer their skills into product design, especially early on in their career, because as a graphic designer, you're learning, visual communication design, how to make things look really good, how to communicate a certain message, and that's basically what really can really set yourself apart early on in your career as a product designer. So especially then, I think it's a really good move, and I think any UX designer or product designer should also know a lot about graphic design. I think it really would increase the impact of their work. But generally, I think there's, of course, there might be some people who are like fundamentally graphic designers who know how to put together maybe even a weird looking mock-up in Photoshop or Sketch or whatever, and they claim to be product designers. I mean, I don't have any problem with them doing that. It's their business, as long as they're living their life and not bothering me. That's fine with me. But I think, yeah, you have that in every field. Like, you might have some. If I want to learn graphic design, I'm sure as a product designer, I might be making some dumb mistakes, like trying to put together like a let's say a poster or something, or I don't know, like a branding project for a big company. I'll probably butcher the project early on, given that that's not my specialist skill. But as long as people are learning and growing, and they're not causing anyone else any problem, I think that's fine. It's just there's a lot of variety in the world. Let people do what they want.
So if there's an early stage for a product designer, where should he can start?
Yeah, I think they should primarily focus on I would say, I mean, it's called visual design, I guess, or your UI design. I think that's where, like, if I were starting again today, that would be the bulk of my focus for the first 6 months to maybe even like a year and a half. Because in most companies, I think the biggest value that comes from a designer, especially at the junior stage, is through you give them like a set of requirements and they very quickly put together a very good looking UI for it. And I think it sounds kind of shallow that you should only focus on the visual layer. Like when I think we keep reading about how design is about user research and like going through a lot of deep product thinking to come up with innovative solutions. But the greatest value comes from shipping good looking, effective, functional UI. And I think it's something that anyone can appreciate. Like, no, not like if you're even if you're not if you're not a designer, you can look at a good-looking piece of UI and appreciate it. Which is why I think that is what would take you the furthest in your career. Then I would add some level of interaction design, some like UX design oriented things like being able to talk to customers, converting those insights into some sort of action. I think also like product thinking, like just thinking about how like if your product manager is saying we need to do this project because it'll move some certain metric X, you should be able to understand what they mean and like how that metric X, like let's say a conversion rate in a particular funnel or daily active users or how many percentage of users are viewing this X page on a monthly basis or whatever, how do those contribute to the overall business. I think understanding those will just make you a better collaborator. So like the general order should be visual design, aka UI design, then more interaction UX design, like systems thinking, followed up by at the end I think just like the product thinking, understanding the business, things like that. I think that's how roughly people should order their learning and growth at the start of their career.
So you talk about conversational design. So what is the importance of conversational design into the product design side, and how you can elaborate the conversational design?
So I'm not an expert at conversational design, like how chatbots and like how Google Assistant, Siri, how all of those work. So I honestly don't really have any comments. Like I only did this like one workshop I was part of the organization team at ND2C for this workshop. But besides that, I honestly don't really have any experience there. So no comments, I guess.
Right. So as our topic is about how product design can help startups and what is the importance of product design towards the startup. So my question is, what do you think? What's the role of a product design in success of a startup as you work in a startups?
I think, especially for early stage startups, I think it's now kind of expected by most, I guess, consumers that any product you build will have a certain level of basic design, quality. And if a startup, like if they launch, if they start their journey without any designer on board, I think they'll be setting themselves on kind of like a wonky foundation where the solution might even be this is especially true for the B2C space, the business to consumer space. Like let's say you have an e-commerce website or you have a social media app. I think that's where people just now expect a certain level of quality. And so if you're starting without a designer, if you're just like if it's just the CEO and engineers just directly shipping something, and the CEO and the design engineers don't really have any sense of design, I think they'll just be reducing their like probability of success. Whereas just like hiring one designer who knows their stuff, I think they can really increase the just like the probability of their success. They don't have to like go all in on design just yet, because they need to figure out if they have a product market fit, if their actual business solution has any legs. But I think having certain baseline level of design by having a designer on board is like, I think, table stakes. It's like a basic requirement in today's tech product ecosystem.
Right. So okay, so when working with startups, what are some of the biggest challenges faced by product designers? Like you also work in startup. So what are the main challenges in terms of a startup, because they have the low budget and don't have so much resources. So in terms of what types of most of the challenges that a product designer can face?
Yeah, so I think for startups particularly, you could think of it as a challenge. It's also just a bit of a trade-off where, for let's say if you're working at a very large company, you might just have like a very narrow sort of like set of requirements, or like a job description where you just like for example at Motive, initially when I was a smaller company, I was working on all parts of the product. Like it was like I would work on compliance on the compliance like portal or the section of the product one day, and then growth on the other, on the website on another day. And so you get a lot of variety of work. And I think that I think is challenging, because I think as a product designer, maybe you do want more depth. But if you're the kind of designer, especially early on in your career, I think one could potentially really benefit from that. Just having this wide variety of work. I think that's. I think startups essentially expect a lot of work, a wide variety of work, and they expect it to be done in a very quick, a less amount of time, which is, it's no easy feat, because you also then want to ensure that there's a high level of quality. I think that's the primary challenge working in a startup. And I think another thing might be, I think it's the lack of process, where maybe the CEO or the head of product, whoever that is, if they're very opinionated, if they have a very strong vision for what they want to be design and develop, they might be micromanaging you. They might not be letting you put in your own creative vision into the solution. So those are some of the challenges I think working in a startup. But it's I think it's part of the it's probably a good idea to have in your large long-term career, to maybe work at a startup, also work at a mid-stage company, at a big tech company later on, just so you have a taste of everything. I think that's a part of the spice of life, I guess. Variety is the spice of life, as they say.
So, as you talk about the micromanagement and you talk about the processes, so what advice you give to startups that are just starting out and trying to develop a product from a scratch level?
I think generally my advice would be, I think startups, they're just trying to optimize everything to achieve product market fit early, as soon as possible. They want to achieve, like, they want to start getting revenue as soon as possible. I think their perspective in general is, we need to just very quickly design something and just launch it, and we'll get much more feedback that way, than compared to the designer spending like 3 months doing user research with like low fidelity, medium fidelity mockups. I think there's probably some middle ground here, some moderate solution here, where sure, you shouldn't let this. I think this is a healthy balance between where the product team or the CEO, they sort of kind of hold the designer, like they rein in the designer a little bit, and I think that's productive, because otherwise, if we're left to our own devices as designers, we'll end up spending like 3 months on user research and whatnot. So I think there's probably some middle ground where designers could maybe spend, like, very quickly iterate on the solutions, but then also very quickly, like very frequently, talk to their customers, do user tests, you could say, or just like have them use a very believable design prototype that you can get feedback on, instead of just like spending another 3 months or 2 months developing the entire solution, then getting feedback, and then having to scrap that entire thing in code, which is much more expensive. So my advice would be to listen to designers just a little bit, maybe not too much, because we might get carried away. But I think there is some value in talking to customers regularly, doing user research, and going to them with high fidelity design prototypes instead of the entire actual functioning code, because there's just a lot of overhead, there's a lot of cost involved in that.
So, as you discussed about the user personas, the wireframing, and other things, also you said that the startup don't have much time to work on the product, and they just in the hurry to live the product. So, in these aspects, how the designer can prioritize these things, like making personas, user research, going out of the building and making some user researches. This is making a high budget on this, and also the making so much time on this.
Yes, so it's a challenge for sure. I think in general, a lot of the I think I kind of alluded to this in the last sort of question. I think designers do have this tendency to get carried away in like very like spending way too much time on research, thinking, oh, if we don't do user personas, like this entire project will be screwed up or something. I think if you are in a company where research is not valued, I think, or generally the typical design artifacts are seen as just being a waste of time. I think it's on the designer then to perhaps figure out what's the minimum amount of research they can do that would have the maximum impact on the product, on their solutions, and they can get that by just like understanding the actual needs of the project. Like if it sounds like from the CEO's perspective, or from the product manager's perspective, that maybe they don't really have a really good idea of who the customer is. If you can tell that the product manager is thinking differently from the engineer, who's thinking differently from the salesperson, then probably I think putting together a quick persona is probably going to be very productive. So like, yeah, you kind of have to look at like what the situation is like, to get the most out of it. Another, I think, really highly effective user research method is, instead of saying, oh, I have to talk to our exact target customers, I have to recruit them from these online different forums and whatnot. Especially if you're sitting in like a co-working space, yes, I think even if you're sitting at home, you can at least have your software like tested by your spouse, your mother. You could go out and like get it tested, have a quick like sort of user test with your neighbor. Go to the local like dukandar, like shopkeeper, if it's if you want to get like a wide variety of user feedbacks. Talk to your colleagues even. It's called, I think, hallway testing, where you just like go into your office hallway and like just grab anyone you can to get feedback. I think there are ways to get high ROI research early, and if you can show the value to your team, then they'll be like, oh, you know what, Hussain, he's been doing such effective user research work, even on a very tight budget. Maybe if you give him a little more budget, he'll be able to do more quality, deeper research that'll even lead to better outcomes.
Right, right. So if we talk about your typical process of measuring your success criteria for design changes, so what is the process of iterating on product design side? If you can typically about your process to measure the success of your design changes.
So I think it has to be a collaboration between the designer, the product manager, and the engineer. They have to figure out early on, ideally early, definitely early on, I think, in the whole software development process, that, oh, if we work on this problem X, and we launch feature Y, how will we know if it actually succeeded? And so I think it's probably a good idea to like decide, like understand those quantitative metrics up front. And you don't have to, I mean, it might be good to like brainstorm 5-10 different metrics, but you should probably pick 1 or 2 or 3 max, I guess, to figure out if the change you've made is actually making a difference. That's the quantitative aspect of it. I think the other is just like qualitative aspects. So like if you're regularly in touch with your customers, if you're hearing people say really good things about the new feature, if you're hearing good things through sales, I think that's probably a good indicator that things are moving. So it has to be, I think, on the quantitative side, it's a collaborative process. On the qualitative side, I think you as a designer could also maybe even talk to customers and figure out like, hey, did you, like, we just shipped this new feature, are you aware of it, were you able to discover it, if they've tried it, like what do they think about it, if they have any additional feedback. I think that those are just like some methods to understand if your actual work is succeeding.
When working with a startup, there's a lack of resources. Like there's less resources are working into this. Like some in some startups, product manager is not available, product owner is not available. Just a project manager, and he's directly dealing with the developers and product designers. So in this situation, the product designer has a whole the responsibility as a product owner or maybe a product manager. So in this scenario, how do you prioritize which feature to be focused on while working with a startup?
Got it. No, so I think in this case, even if there isn't a dedicated like product manager on the team, I think there is someone who is basically accountable for the success of the project. And so I remember at RBSort, for example, in our team we had like there was me as a designer, there were a bunch of engineers, and then there was one project manager. So like I think fundamentally the project manager was like prioritizing different things, but then I think beyond that, we would always go back to the CEO and ask them, give them progress updates. They would then come up with a vision for what we want to get done over multiple quarters, things like that. So like the CEO would sort of become the product manager. I think in such a situation, the product designer does have an opportunity to sort of take on some of the role of the product manager, I think, and grow different skill sets, grow in their career. But I think it's supposed to be very collaborative. Like I think you can't just be like, oh, we should prioritize X because I think these are the pros and cons of it. Sure, you can communicate that with the project manager because there will be some overlap there in terms of like what they want to get done when. You can communicate that with the CEO, but I think you just have to be you just have to collaborate with your team to figure out any gaps in skill sets, any gaps in like the team's collaboration about that are usually addressed by a product manager.
Right, right, right. So for now, we are going towards the sharing some insights from professionals towards the people who are pursuing their career into the product design. So if we talk about how important is collaborating in teamwork as a product designer, well, you have to collaborate with different teams like a product team, developing team, marketing team. So how is it important to collaborate smoothly?
It's very important. I think collaboration is just the fundamental, building block. Like if you're not collaborating well, if you have like really strong opinions and you're not really open to what other people are saying, if you don't really know how to communicate, brainstorm, how to ensure how to set expectations, staying organized, helping other teams stay organized, communicating in time, just things like that. I think I think you could have the strongest skills as a designer. You could be you could just generally be a rock star in general, but if you're bad at collaboration, I think that'll just have a very negative multiplier effect on everything else. So I think it's one of those soft skills I mentioned earlier when it comes to exposure. Like you have to be very good at collaboration. It can make up for a lot of like even if you don't have certain hard skills, if you're good at collaborating, if you have a good attitude, you're working hard, you're communicating things on time, you're organized. I think that can make up for a lot of things, especially early on in your career, as long as you're a good collaborator.
Right, right. So, how do you approach designing for accessibility, and what are some best practices to follow?
Yes, I think to be fairly honest, I think when it comes to designing for accessibility, I think for example, my experience at Motive, we were doing our best to ensure stuff like font sizes are like readable, tab targets like click targets are large enough. There's enough color contrast between different visuals, let's say. But I think that there's a lot more that can be done when it comes to accessibility that I feel like we couldn't really prioritize because they were like, just like bigger fish to fry. I think in general, I think again, I think it's one of those cases where as a startup, like there's so much that a startup wants to do. Accessibility usually falls to the wayside, and I think that's where designers can just like learn about basic best practices like the ones I just mentioned, like basic areas like the ones I just mentioned: color contrast, font sizes, ensuring that click targets are large enough, using both color and shapes to differentiate between different icons. Not relying on very complex like interactions that require like complex hand like motor movement. I think those are things we can do. Beyond that, like ensuring things like ensuring if you click tab, it goes through the appropriate order of forms. Your software is like readable through a screen reader. Stuff like that we have less control over. Like we can work with engineers, but then fundamentally if engineering doesn't really value that, or like they have way too much else to prioritize, then it's kind of like they can't really do much. So my advice would be to do like learn about it as much as you can and just do the best within the framework that you have.
So, Awais, if we talk about the Pakistani talent, how do you see the Pakistani talent in globally?
So I think when I was in Pakistan, I used to think, all these designers abroad, they have some sort of like special skill set. They have some special advantage over us, which is why we can never really compete with them. Ever since I moved to America, to the Bay Area about 3 years ago, I've obviously gotten to know a lot of designers here, gotten a lot of exposure. And I think obviously I think they do have some level of privilege in the sense that they have better education systems, they have much more exposure. They don't have to worry about learning to communicate well in English because that's built in, for example, for quite a lot of them. So I think there is that, but there's I think fundamentally no difference between us or them. Like we can do just as much hard work and like eventually design great things, communicate just as well, collaborate just as well. And there's so many examples I think of very successful Pakistani designers globally that I think there's I think for folks back home who were thinking the way I was back when I was working in Pakistan. I used to think that people who work at like Apple, Facebook, like Netflix, all these other big companies. They're just humans, just like us, and they're just like the difference is maybe they have more opportunities, more exposure, but I think we can make up for it through hard work and just like staying the course, is just being very persistent.
Right. So thank you so much, Awais, for your insights. You talk about how product design can help emerging businesses, what are the challenges they have faced, and you give some insights for the people who are pursuing their career into the product design. So it was very nice to talk with you and it was very helpful for the people, I hope. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Allah Hafiz.